Lovely. This meeting is being recorded. For all of those of them, I'm very, very happy to be here, and thank you for plugging in to this little top-level intro to the glorious medieval theatre tradition of Curnow. And I'm now going to attempt that seamless technological feat of sharing a screen. And just give me a thumbs up, Chloe, if that's working. How's that? Yes. So this talk today, my darlings, is an unashamed advert for you to buy my book. Second edition, now out. First edition sold out, and with a few small tweaks to one or two places where I got it blatantly wrong. The second edition now exists, published to coincide with the exhibition at Crescent Curnow that Chloe mentioned. So let's crack straight in and just make sure we know what the heck we're talking about when we say Plen and Gwari. Why do I say Plen and Gwari? Because some people get arguing about that E. Plain is the English dialect version, but with an E in Cornish, you are allowed to officially hold it for as long as you like. So Plen and Gwari is fine by me. The most famous one, of course, is Plen and Gwari in St. Just. And there's a picture from 100 years and a bit ago. And not a huge amount has changed, by the way. Note the splendid Cornish hedge stonework in the foreground. Has to be continued up in the middle of Bomimort Cadroia. You can see that we've got this circular space. And whilst we know that the Plen in St. Just looks pretty much like that today, it didn't look quite like that 250 years ago, just 250, because along came William Borlase and he drew this. And actually, William Borlase was a very accurate archaeologist. So when he says it was a really smart circle, we know he's right. When he says that the terraces were clad with granite, we're pretty good to be sure he's right. And in fact, there's a little bit of geophys evidence that down in the bottom corner, there might be one or two buried deep that we could rediscover of those granite terraces. You know, he's quite accurately drawn the terraces. He's accurately drawn it all. So we know that poor old St. Just Plen has been cuffed around over the years and is not quite what it would have once been. And one of the key issues is the depth of it. There's about 3 feet of compacted ash across the middle where the good old tusters have chucked out their fireplace ash for 300 years and raised the innards. So really those outer banks should be a lot higher, and that becomes important directly. William Borlase drew a lot of stuff, and here's another picture. And this is, of course, the one that Chloe had on her waiting screen at the beginning. And this picture can be seen in Crescent Curnow today, downstairs in the intro to their exhibition. So another important reason to go. This picture is altogether more complicated than the first one. And it is, of course, Piran round. And here we can see once again that terracing around the middle. We can see this strange structure that we call the devil's spoon. He who sups with the devil must have a long-handled spoon, is the saying that that's based on. And once again, we've got some pretty accurate ideas of what this structure used to look like. And in fact, if we go there today, it's not in bad nick. It's not in bad nick. Look over at the far left-hand side, and you can see some shadows of terracing. You can see that there's a trackway right across the very middle of it. And of course, there's the Devil's Spoon, the pit and the trench, and a bit of subsidence in the rampart itself. So we have 2 circular structures out there in the Cornish landscape, but we have reason to believe that there are more. What reasons do we have? Well, let's start with William Scone back in 1680. And the 2 main things I'd like to point out from this quote are, one, that he says they contained thousands of people. Thousands, that's a lot of people in an audience. And secondly, he says that there are many which remain. Many, not just 2. And then if we move forward in time and we get to William Howells, who most people like to point out is a very unreliable and scurrilous gossip monger, he actually says scarce any parish an amphitheater. So he's saying we should have one per parish. Hang on a minute. And then if we come up to our friend William Burleigh's in that same publication that we've just been looking at, he says we have great numbers of them, and he calls them specifically Plen and Gwari. So we should be looking for a lot more than just two, shouldn't we? Here we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and Rod Lyon is the person who did the absolute donkey work here. If we go back even further, back in the 1930s, Henderson compiled a list of over a dozen. Oliver Padell, I think, knocked it up to getting into the 20 mark. Rod Lyon went through every single tithe map in ye olde fashioned real bits of paper and discovered every clue he could. And he came up with getting 40-ish places that could or might be Plen and Gwari play in place. Now, what Rod didn't have was Google Maps. And being a lightweight who doesn't want to actually have to go off and do the real hard work, zooming around on the Google Maps is a much easier way to go. So let's have a little look at these two. Here's Pear and Round. We've got the circular shape and we've got the Devil's Spoon very clearly. And then down the bottom, we got Plen and Gwari, and we can see how it's sub-circular, if you like, in its current iteration. Interestingly enough, it seems likely that it actually extended further northward rather than necessarily further extending southward. However, the point being that we can use these sorts of online tools now to do research in ways that weren't previously possible. And let me just show you some examples. So, and now my doesn't want to share. Why not? Oh, no, it has. Okay. So if we look at these four examples of circular structures in the landscape as taken from Google Maps, down in the bottom corner, you've got down at Ruin. We know that that's a Plen and Gwari. It was referred to and described as such. That's definitely one. When you get up to Cubert with the road straight through the middle of the circle, that is referred to on a map as the Playings. Pretty good evidence, I would say. When you look at the Bodmin one, that's on top of the beacon and has always been known locally as the Wrestling Ring. Now, we've got pretty good reasons to say that where wrestling happened were also places that we can term Plen and Gwari. So we can be fairly confident about that. And then you come up to Gwithian, we got no documentary evidence, other than it blinking well looks like one, and it's quite close to the church, and that matches up with where we expect to find these structures. And what this highlights is the fuzziness around structures that we can definitively say are Plen and Gwaris. And the truth is, we are missing a huge amount of archaeological field work that needs really to be done to establish a kind of thumbprint of what constitutes a Plen and Gwari and what doesn't. But there are various clues you do get. And so if you look at the next slide, if you look really closely, there is a clue in this one as to, oh, there it is. So, yeah, that's Matt. I believe you're on the call, Matt. Matt worked with us back in 2015, 16. And this place called Plen and Gwari is just outside Marazion. And people had previously struggled to find any structure that resembled a Plen and Gwari. However, on Google Maps, if you go down Plen and Gwari Lane, all the fields in that area are actually very rectangular and very regular. And all the fields, in other words, it's enclosed really quite late on. And the hedges tend to be pretty straight. And then suddenly you get this wonky one that does a crazy wiggle. Now, we actually went out and did a very brief 1 day of geophys and discovered, sure enough, that kink you see there there is evidence of a ditch underground completing the circle. Therefore, we believe that is the Plen and Gwari site. And if you came down from the north, from St Hilary Churchtown down Plen and Gwari Lane, you would end at that place. So there are various places where footprints exist, either to a greater or lesser extent. Here's another lovely example. The other one was Ruin Major. This is Ruin Minor. Again, the Reverend Polwheel in the early 18 whatevers says that the road cuts through the edge of the old amphitheater. And if you continue that circle around, you can see that the road does just nip it. Once again, we were able to do a single day's geophys surveying, and we even found some evidences around the top edge that could have been post holes, could have even been the pillars for supporting pavilions. We just don't know. A lot more work to be done. But when you put that onto the old map, you can see there, put in a dotted circle as to where I believe that is the position of that Plen and Gwari. The other hedges, by the way, those straight ones, are only, it turns out they were only there for, they only came in the Victorian time and were disappeared again within about 20 years. They were almost like temporary hedges. So Plen and Gwari Cottage, as it was known for many years, you might be interested to know this, that you can go and stay in it. It's a holiday let. And just in case, as you come to visit Cornwall, you can't cope with the Cornish language, it's all right because it's been Englished, and you can call it Rose Cottage Stay. So on the subject of English language, playing place is of course the nearest we can come to of a translation for the word Plen and Gwari. And playing place just outside Truro, not only did it have a playing place, it had two. So down at the bottom of this map where you see the words playing place, that's where the big roundabout is now, and the garage and everything. And the wiggly road is the one you come up from Truro. Actually, the straight road is the old coach road. Go up there near the word long with milestone there, and it says round. Well, one's round and one's not quite round. Why are there two? My personal take on that is that the smaller wonky one could have been as old as an Iron Age structure, and that come the medieval times they needed to upgrade and make a better version, and so constructed a slightly larger circular one. If you go there to this day, that field has been ploughed and ploughed and ploughed till there's not a trace of any of those dotted lines there at all. There's just a bit of a wiggle in the hedge where that footpath runs through. But we've got the site. By the way, that site becomes really quite important in that it's in the parish of Key, and therefore we can be pretty sure that that is the place that the play Brunan's Quay was performed. More of that directly. So there are a lot of examples like this I could run through, but rather than do them all one by one and take up the rest of your life, just have a little look at that scatter. Now then, each of them that has got a light yellow label are ones that I've fairly arbitrarily gone, those are probable, as opposed to the ones with the darker brown label, which I've gone, hang on, I'm only going to let that be a possible. And there's a couple of things just to mention about that. And I think one of the important things is, I got told off, by the way, by Paul Hodge, because we've not included County Stratton in the top of Curnow has been cut off. And as a good Cornish nationalist, he says we need every inch we can get. But look, there really isn't anything we can be very sure of further east than Bodmin and St Mabin. And that line itself also becomes quite an important thing when we're looking at the history of the language. So these things are pretty dense across the west of Cornwall. And why not ask ourselves, where's the one in my parish? If William Howells says there was one pretty much in every parish, then surely there's still more work to be done on this as well. By the way, you know what it's like. As soon as you complete something as beautiful as this, you make new discoveries. So since then, for instance, I'm pretty sure that now we have one at Porthleven. The one at Camborne has moved a little bit, and I reckon I know where that is now. Ludgvan, it said record of remains in the past. Oh my dear life, there's proper remains today. You can see stuff there and somebody sent us the photos of the stuff in their garden, which is clearly the Ludgvan Plen. So it keeps updating. And just recently, I've been lucky enough to work with the Historic Environment Service at Cornwall Council. And again, I'm sure that Matt Blewett, you'll be pleased to hear this bit of news, Matt, that all the data that we collected back in the 2015-16 when we were researching all this stuff is going to get uploaded into a dedicated layer on that map. So the interactive map will have a Plen and Gwari layer, which is great because it's then easy to adjust and tweak and add and subtract. And that will be publicly available. Okay. Right. So that's talking about big circular things in the landscape. And I haven't really said very much about how they're used or the controversies that used to be. There used to be more controversy. I think there's more consensus now about exactly what those circular structures are. However, we have to jump now to not bits of paper at all, but bits of parchment, bits of manuscript vellum. And this is where we celebrate the fact of this great homecoming, and that if you go to Crescent Kerno today, and I hope you will get there over the summer, you can see these 4 manuscripts that have come back home to Cornwall for the first time. Each one of them has probably not been in Cornwall for hundreds of years, and it's almost certain they have never all 4 been in the same place at the same time. So that's pretty exciting. And Taran Tara, the first of those, here she is, my beauties. This is the Ordinalia, and I scored brownie point because I took this photo at the Bodleian Library some years ago before she came here, and it's just a wonderfully powerful thing to actually be allowed to touch and smell and look. You know, there's a tiny dot in the middle of that circle where the scribe's compass point went in. There are some little scratches and changes over here. Yeah, and you can, I mean, one of the interesting things is that nowadays there's actually a lot of codicology that can be done. You know, we are tracing the genomes from skeletons that have been in the ground for 4,000 years. We can certainly start to do much deeper scientific analysis on the journey of these manuscripts, and really, again, a huge amount that could be done to help us understand exactly where they were written, why, and by whom. So here's the Ordinalia, and you're looking at the opening diagram and what is effectively a cast list. So basically, the left-hand side here, if you start at the top, the first one in Latin says Deus Pater. It's abbreviated. The next one says Adam. The next one says Eva, and the little Roman numerals next to it are telling you how many lines that character has. All right. So in other words, you get somebody who's good at learning lines to play Adam because they've got XXXIX. That's 39 lines. Whereas, you know, first torturer has only got 3. So you can give that to someone who doesn't enjoy learning lines so much. The Ordinalia has 3 extraordinary claims made about it, which are a little enthusiastic, and some people have said rubbish. It is the earliest surviving complete play script from anywhere in Britain. It is the earliest surviving play script complete from anywhere in Britain. It is the earliest surviving complete cycle, religious cycle, of play scripts from anywhere across Europe. And that diagram you're looking at has been suggested that is the earliest surviving stage diagram from anywhere in the world. Now, notice I chucked the word surviving into each of those things. Of course, there are earlier plays. Of course, there were earlier fragments of plays. Of course, there are earlier fragments of cycles. Of course, there must have been earlier Greek theatre, Indian theatre. These things predate this by many hundreds of years. But we reckon that this was probably already written by 1400, could be 1375. Once again, probably a copy of an earlier version. It's an extraordinary and special thing, and you can go and see it for real in Crescent-Cerno now. Here's the opening page for you. Here begins the ordinal of Origo Mundi, the origin of the world. Ordinal, by the way, we use the word today, ordain, or to order, and so an ordinal is the list of the way it should be done proper, and that's an ordinalia is the plural, so it's the collection of instructions of how to do it right. All right. Once again, up in the top left, we've got Deus Pater, abbreviated in Latin, and then some ditto marks because God gets all the first lines. And shall us open it? Shall us? And tas in nef in Gilwer, formia a puptra a vis gris, onan ha trion in Gwir, and tas and mab and spiris, and tas and nev in Gilwer. That's the opening lines, my lovelies, of the earliest surviving play from anywhere in Britain. And yet, have any of us ever heard it before? Maybe a few of us anoraks have. This thing deserves a greater trumpet. And tas in nev and Gilwer, the Father in heaven I am called. Formia a puptra a vis gris. I'm the creator of everything that will be made. On in Gwir, 1 and 3 we are in truth, and Tas and Mab and Spirits, the Father and the Son and the Spirit. Okay, you know where we're going. This is a didactic instructional piece. The church is going, you know that dodgy stuff about there only being one God, but now we've got 3 of them. I need you to understand that, and I'm going to unpack it. And this is about the orthodox view, and it's going to explain to you how to save your soul and not end up in hell by following the orthodox set of beliefs. Right, that's true about the ordinalia. Another thing, I'll just share you another little bit, also from the ordinalia. Notice there's by the way, there are over 20 strophic forms. In other words, syllable count, rhyming, how they rhyme, etc. And it's very disciplined. The syllable count is very accurate, which is great helpful to us in all kinds of reasons for looking at the Cornish language contained. The reason I chose you this little bit is because of the scribblings 8. In other words, most of the scribbles that are in a different hand and a slightly different colour ink are actually to do with stage directions. And that little bit halfway down says something like, in Latin, get the altar ready and God to stand by. So you're actually going, here, remember, you've got to get the next bit ready because it's coming soon. In other words, this is a working document, a hands-on working document that a real person used and scribbled notes in order to put on a play. And I find that quite an exciting idea that this, you can smell the workingness of this. So let's have a little word about these circular diagrams, and let's just flag up, isn't it a coincidence we found 2 extant and at least 50 odd possible circular structures out in the landscape, and now we've got circular diagrams in a play script. Here are the 3 that are all in the ordinalia, and then there are 2 more in Bunan's Meriazak. So we now got 5 diagrams, all circular, and 50 odd circular amphitheaters. It's plausible there's no connection, my lovelies. Some people really tried to push the idea that they're not connected and it's fluke. Well, yeah. It's also true that maybe Darwin got it wrong and there's no such thing as evolution, but I ain't even going to bother to argue with you about that. So what I'm going to do now is blow your brain a bit. Don't try and read this next slide. That's all of the different words you've just seen on those diagrams, all laid out in a kind of table form. And what I'm going to do now is take the English translation, not the Latin, and put just the top 5. No, is it 5? Top 8, sorry, the top 8. So here's day 1 from the ordinalia, Origo Mundi, and it goes Kelum, as in heaven, that word at the top, again, it's an abbreviation. And I'm starting at 12 o'clock and going anti-clockwise. Torturers, hell, King Pharaoh, King David, King Solomon, Abraham, bishops, as you go around the circle. All right, that was day one. Let's add day two. So on day two, we once again have got heaven at the top. We get torturers, we get doctors, around the circle. Now let's go on to day three. So day two is the passion, the crucifixion, and day three is resurrection. So once again, we've got heaven at the top and we've got torturers next. So all 3 days, well, that makes sense. You know, if this is a stage diagram, why would you build 3 different heavens? You'd always have heaven in the same place, wouldn't you? Yes, you would. But hang on a minute. Now let's add the 2 from Bunan's Meriazic, which is a completely different time and place and not related. And we've still got heaven at 12 o'clock. We've still got torturers next, and we've still got hell next. So there was a uniformity of approach to how these diagrams are written. And I asked Heidi Ball to do a diagram of the medieval Cornish geopsychology. That's what that is, a mind map. And here's the critical thing, my lovelies. Do you know, I always wondered why in Cornish the word for right, dio, is the same as the word for south, dio. And one of the words for north, gorgleth, is the same as left, gleth. Well, that only makes sense if you're facing east. Of course you are. Because east is looking towards the Holy Land, east is looking towards the sky, east is looking towards the second coming of the Lord. That's why the altars of the churches are at the east. And so actually, to our sensibility, this diagram is 90 degrees squiffed round. And if you want north, you've got to look to hell. In fact, I've put a tiny compass rose in the middle and it says north pointing towards hell. And so heaven is east and King David is west. And so we've got a consistent orientation and layout of these as well. Now, I will jump over some of the idiotic ideas that have been put forward over the years about how these spaces might have worked. If these big circular spaces are theatres, and these diagrams show how the staging goes, people really struggle to make sense of that because they had this word theatre in their head, and we're thinking about a 20th century black box, proscenium, sit down, watch a play. That's not what we're talking about. That's not where it came from. It's from a different cultural route, and we have to reinvent that. One person that I've ever found really got it right, and he was the professor at Bristol University, Professor Richard Southern, and in 1975 he drew this. 1975 is an important date because in a minute I'm going to talk about 1969, which is earlier. So 1975 he was drawing this. And this makes complete sense. You have a circular structure, see the terraces, see a hell stuck over there in the north. And you've then got these stations or pavilions around the outside. So now we can start to use a Plen and Gwari as a playing place and think about putting on a play in it. One note. Several people have referred to these pavilions and called them rudimentary bus shelters. And that's what he's drawn, isn't it? Let's draw a rudimentary bus shelter because we're talking about those primitive backward medieval people. Is that right? Primitive backward medieval people who made the cathedral at Chartres. It's a very condescending idea that somehow our forebears had less craft and skill than us. Oh no, they didn't. Here's a picture, not Cornish. This is a French picture, roughly contemporary, 1470s. Now, these are not rudimentary bus shelters, are they, my lovelies? See, at the far left, you've got God enthroned in splendor, surrounded by angels. I reckon God was a real human, sat 20 feet above the ground in heaven, full of awe. At the far end, the right, you've got I'm pretty certain that's real water and a real boat floating on it, real flames, real smoke, demons leaping around and human beings being mangled in the torturous pit of hell. I think these things were depicted full on, and that also the nature of the building was full of craft. One really quite interesting suggestion from Professor Sidney Higgins is that all of Giotto's paintings, in which we're somewhat familiar with these murals or frescoes, and a slightly strange perspective of the buildings, etc., etc. He says he wasn't painting real life scenes, he was painting scenes from medieval theatre. And as soon as you look at that and go, it's a scene in a play, it starts to make really sense. There's an actor playing God leaning down. The actor playing St. Francis is raised up. Oh, lo and behold, there's a stage direction in Greens and Bees that says God ascends to heaven in a cloud. Yep, I think he did exactly that. Actually, the level of artistry, skill, and technical accomplishment in these plays, I think, was pretty high. They included live animals, they included huge choruses playing the armies and battles. It was all very full on costume, music. You were immersed in a very spectacular spectacle. Now then, here's the key issue. Here's the key thing that most people got wrong through the years in looking at this stuff, and that's simply this. Where are you going to put the audience? Well, obviously, there's these terraces, and terraces equals seats, seats equals put your bum. There's a guy sitting down there. This is peering round. This is a picture from about 1870. Of course, you're going to sit on the terraces. Aha. You're getting mixed up, my lovelies, with this. This is a Greek amphitheater. Wonderful, amazing. Thousands of years predating our Plen and Gwari. Technical accomplishment of extreme wonderment. Apparently, even if you're that little person way up the top there, you can hear somebody speaking because the acoustics is perfect. You can seat loads of people, but can I just point out, that's a totally different shape from that. The two are not the same, but because of our obsession with classical learning, people have tended to assume that the terraces are there for people to sit on, and that therefore the playing place is the bit in the middle. And lo and behold, here is a photo from 1969 taken by Sidney Higgins, actually, who was assistant director. And at this time, Richard Southern was the professor in Bristol Uni, and he drew that picture I showed you just a few years later. So his thinking must have been getting ready. The Bristol University drama department arrived like a UFO, landed in Cornwall, and put this stuff on. And as you can see, they had to forcibly conscript school children to come in and watch it. By the way, Dave Cruz says it wasn't true that there was no Cornish input into that production, because he says his dad cut the grass for them. So there was some Cornish contribution after all. But look what they've done. They've sat the audience passively around the edge. And I don't know if you can feel from this the lack of atmosphere, the lack of I can't see how that person in red is going to be heard, understood, and enjoyed by all of those little people all around the edge and all around the edge. It just doesn't feel like you're setting up a space that will be charged with atmosphere. And I'm afraid the same goes when we look at this aerial shot of St. Just, Plen and Gwari, see the audience spread out all around the edge. And if you want final proof, now, let's be clear, I am not knocking the people who wanted to keep these scripts in use and understood the connection with Plen and Gwari, and they wanted to have a good time. But that kid there has taken his helmet off, sat it on the deck, slumped down, and these children are really fed up and bored. The audience over there are screening their eyes from the sun. No one can hear what's happening. This is a worthy attempt to use the material, but they got a key notion wrong. And that's quite simply, the audience need to be on the hoof and they need to be in the middle. of Plen and Gwari will only work if we use it inside out. This is me asserting an idea without direct proof. I asked Heidi Bull to draw a picture of what I was talking about, and this is a bit more like it. If we think that these religious dramas began in a church, and back in medieval church days, you had no pews, people stood in church and moved around the church to follow the Stations of the Cross. It got so popular, it came out into the town squares in Italy, and stages were built around the town square to cope with the size of the crowds outdoors on the hoof. When that was brought, maybe by the Franciscans, to places like Cornwall, we didn't have town squares as such, but we did have Iron Age rounds. And we did have places that could possibly have been used for meeting and wrestling and activities. And so it seemed natural to put them into these round spaces, the audience on the hoof, the action all around you. So all of a sudden you're immersed in a theatrical experience, and you've gone into a world in which the boundary between performer and audience is nicely fuzzy. When they say in the script, 20 soldiers rush through and fight with 15 others, I reckon, you know, you have to shift quickly to make sure you weren't impaled on their spears and get out the way. I often say to people, I reckon it was a bit like going to Glastonbury, but there was a plot. So that's my offer about what actually happened in these spaces. This hugely colourful culmination of your community's self-expression in a space that was dedicated to experience. Let's have a little think then about the fact that in the middle of this diagram, there's a word in the middle, capella, meaning chapel, and that actually does link with the one surviving English diagram, which is of a similar antiquity, that clearly has a bit of a castle in the middle. So here's your devil's spoon, and this is why I asked Heidi to draw a structure in the middle of the Plen and Gwari. It's quite simple. Back to William House, in the centre of which there was a cave, subterranean vault, out of which a little door issued forth the actors. So there are several stage directions, again, in Greens and Bees, that could be interpreted as meaning that characters have to appear from out of the earth or disappear from out of the earth. And in fact, when you start looking across Europe, there are dozens, literally dozens and dozens of examples where trapdoors were used and people disappeared and came up again, and those kind of mechanical gizmo. So quite clearly for me, the Devil's Spoon, we're looking at a collapsed in tunnel. It would have been roofed. And then when you got to the middle, there's a little seating place and a place you can emerge into the middle. All right. So we've described this extraordinary immersive experience. We've described how it might have been an amazing thing to attend. And we just got to understand a little bit why it flourished and why it then died out. Died out is a passive term. You could say suppressed. There's a couple of things you need to understand. The first is to understand the European government of the day. Did I just say European government? Yes, I did. That was deliberate. Here's a map of Europe. Do you like that map of Europe? You've been Europe? Oh, who says that North goes at the top? That's just a random, probably, probably by a bunch of Brits who drew all the maps and put Britain at the top. Actually, Munster, who was German, decided that the thing to put at the top would be the seat of the European government. Why do I keep saying? What I mean is the church, my lovelies, the church. The church had so much power across all aspects of life that in many ways it effectively functioned as government. Yes, I know you had all the kings, etc. as well. But the church was based in Rome, and so you put Rome at the top of the map. And the extent and reach of the Catholic Church really did affect every aspect of people's lives. And that's really important to understand. That first script we shared, the Ordinalia, is about making sure that people are adhering to orthodoxy. It is set up like that. I do just want to point out something, my beauties. See that funny shaped island down the bottom, Anglia? What's that place? Cornubia. Of course it is. Of course it is. Because of all the maps from this era, almost inevitably, they include a distinctive and separate notion of Cornwall. Wales, Scotland, England, and Cornwall. Yes, you have booked into a Zoom with a person who chooses deliberately to see the world through Cornish glasses. Unlike so many commentators who, for me, are extraordinarily English in their paradigm, they're not even aware of the glasses they're wearing. They think they're neutral, but actually, again and again, there's this paradigm that Cornwall is a county in England and Cornish people are just some slightly strange inbred version of English people. No, my lovelies, the Cornish people are one of the family of British nations and have an entire history that is distinct and entirely separate from that of the English, just as the Welsh, just as the Scottish. Why is that relevant to this? Well, it becomes really relevant as we start to put together the story of the where these plays sat in a historical context. So we're now well into the reign of King Henry VIII. And in fact, Polydore Virgil was his official historian, if you like. And he says that the whole of Britain is divided into 4 parts, 1 inhabited by Englishmen, 1 of Scots, the 3rd of Welsh, and what's the 4th? You know what it is. In other words, even under that centralizing fascist King Henry VIII, even under him, there was still an acknowledgement that the Cornishness was as separate as was Welsh, as was Scottish. I'm not pretending that every single person signed up to this view at that time, but it existed and it still exists for some of us today. So Henry VIII wanted to make sure that his power was clear. He wanted to break the power of the Roman Church. You know, in many ways, he wasn't really a Protestant. He was just a Catholic who wanted to be in charge rather than the Pope. In the first instance, he wasn't actually about changing religious practice as such. But what he did want to do was make sure he had all his guns in the right place. And so he got Lord Burleigh to create this map or maps of all the coast showing where all the fleets were. And this is Falmouth Haven. Once again, don't think north at the top, think north at the bottom. So we're looking out to sea from Falmouth. And there's the nice big English flag to make sure you know, And the fascinating bit of this map is down in the bottom right corner. We're going to zoom in now to the bottom right corner. And in this little bit, firstly, this is another lovely discovery from Rod Lyon. Just to next to the church there, you can see some faint circles. Clearly, this is the Plen and Gwari. And I'm pretty convinced that that is the site of the Plen and Gwari. And in fact, that slight curve can still be seen there today if you go to the car park on Islington Wharf, and there's a curve of wall which accidentally still follows the same footprint as where that Plen and Gwari would have been. But up towards the top right, you may be able to make out the words Ye College, and you may be able to see a bit of a structure. It's a walled encampment right next to the river there. And here's a drawing done later, presumably from that map, to show you Glasney College. Glasney College, founded in 1265. That's 1 year after Merton College, Oxford University. Yes, had it survived Henry VIII's Reformation, it would be the 2nd oldest university in Britain. No, that's not true, is it? Because St Andrews is old. It would be in the top 3 or 4 or 5. I can't remember. It was old. It's pretty certain that this is where the Ordinalia was written, and may well be also where the other Cornish plays in the collection were written as well. There's various bits of evidence. People have debated to what extent it was a powerhouse for Cornish cultural identity, or to what extent it was just making use of the current vernacular Cornish to impose current orthodoxy, Catholic, at that time. So this is a map which I asked Brian Hoskin to produce based on the Lord Burleigh map in its kind of aesthetic, looking south again. And listed here are all the place names that you find in Origo Mundi. And lo and behold, the place names are all clustered around Penrhyn, all clustered around the college. And in fact, Jane Bakir, I'm not sure how you pronounce her name, Baker, she's actually shown that each one of these places had some sort of connection back to Glasney College. So we can be pretty sure that Glasney was at the heart of producing these scripts. I said that at the beginning, the Ordinalia was about enforcing religious orthodoxy, but not all the plays are like that. So we have 2 surviving saints plays. By contrast, Brittany's got 120 odd, many of which have never been studied or translated. But we have 2. By the way, they are the only 2 full-length surviving play scripts from anywhere in Britain. There are some other quite big fragments. But all those other ones in the English language are all about standard Catholic saints on the official lists, and Catherines, and can't remember who. Ours are about weird, strange Celtic saints, St. Mary Azic and St. Kay. And each one of them celebrates our link with Brittany. In each of them, the protagonist comes from Brittany. In each one of them, they're rooted very much in a parochial identity, and by parochial I mean of this parish. And so through the exposition of these stories, these plays are going, we know who we are and we know how we're connected internationally. And I love that aspect of being passionate about this place and about our outward looking connections across perceived national borders. But here's the next thing that's an aspect of these plays. They're subversive. They're absolutely rebellious. They're absolutely naughty plays. Here we've got the Duke of Cornwall saying that he's got the right of everything from Tamar to Land's End. Let's be specific about the territory. This is Curnow, Tamar to Land's End. And he says to Tudor, you have no right in this country. Now, people are keen to point out that Tudor was already a baddie name. It's in one of the Lives of the Saints. It props up in folklore here and there. And so this Tudor doesn't mean the king. But this was happening when the king was called Tudor. If I told you I'm writing a play about a bunch of Cornish people fighting against a character called Boris, oh, I didn't mean that, Boris. I think you'd get the message. And so the same here. People knew that Tudor stood for the English king. So this was about defining who we are and seeing ourselves as resistant to the orthodoxy. All of that was to come to a head in 1549. So in 1548, Glasney was the dissolution of the monasteries. It all sounds very peaceful, doesn't it? But it was done nastily. It was pillage the gold, pillage the silver plate, desecrate the images, sell off all the assets. And in 1549, we had the imposition of the English language prayer book. And so across Cornwall, there was huge uprising, and it was led by Humphrey Arundel of Helen near Bodmin. And here's one of the demands that the rebels made. Now, it's been pointed out, this is only one demand, and by the time they finished, they'd got up to 16. They kept adding extra ones. The point is that in this demand, the Cornish language is inextricably linked to rebelling against the enforced religious changes of the Reformation. In other words, to speak Cornish is to be a recusant, is to be wanting to go back to that weird old Catholic practice. They make it clear, we want to have feast days, we want to have our own saints, we want music and procession and dancing and strange plays in Plen and Gwari. This is part of our culture, this is our language, this is our identity. And it got squished. We've got eyewitness accounts of 900 gagged and bound Cornish prisoners having their throats cut in under 10 minutes in Exeter. 900. Now, at that time was a lot less than today. And Rod Lyon's calculations reckon that it's certainly over 20% of the adult males of Cornwall lost their lives that year. This is an absolutely enormous blow to the Cornish language speaking community, and an enormous blow to what we're exploring, which is the Plen and Gwari phenomenon and the medieval theatre. Because let's be clear, that kind of behaviour was actively suppressed. And William Howells also gives us a quote about how that occurred. Now, this plaque here is on the church in St Ives, and this has been put up to, and it talks about the people who died to defend the Catholic faith. Yes, they did. And so if we look at it with Catholic eyes, we go, they were defending Catholicism. If we look at them with Cornish eyes, we go, they were defending Cornishism. Both can be true at the same time. Of course, that wasn't the end by any means, and the misnamed English Civil War, really, 100 years later, put the final touches. I mean, it wasn't an English Civil War. It involved Irish people, Scottish people, Welsh people, Cornish people, as well as English people. And of course, the Cornish army took the whole of southwest England for the royalist cause, because it was a cause that recognised their difference, recognised their language, recognised their culture. But that too was crushed. And anything that hadn't been done in the first round of the Reformation was completed by the Roundheads and the New Model Army, who went through Cornwall, not just Cornwall, they did it other places as well, smashed all the church windows, destroyed all the saints' icons, made sure that the pagan stones were toppled, painted over all of the murals on the church walls, etc., etc. And it's one of the reasons I'm very much looking forward to Professor Michelle Brown's new book about pre-Reformation iconography that does exist in Cornwall, because it was obliterated. My lovelies, when you look at those images of ISIS destroying wonderful old things because they don't fit with the current Islamic ideology, that sort of religious fervour occurred here 500-ish years ago. And the churches, etc., we see now are essentially denuded of all the pre-Reformation iconography we would have had. And the reason this is relevant is because along with all that iconography went the plays, and the fact that you could dress up as God or dress up as Jesus was considered profane. And then we come to the kind of final days and the embers. And this is a letter, unpublished, from Nicholas Boson to Edward Lloyd in Oxford. And there's two little things in there. The first bit is there's so few of them left speaking Cornish, and they've lost so much vocabulary that they're embarrassed to speak it, and that feels very sad. But the second is this little glimpse of Mr. Pendarvis of Camborne. Now, Matthew Spriggs has done a bit of work on tracking down who this Mr. Pendarvis might have been, and he's only really got one candidate. And the extraordinary thing about that is the dates. So Nicholas Boson, this is sometime around 1700-ish, whatever it is. And the Pendarvis we know, if you look at the dates, he must have been doing this dictating to the devil as late as 1620, or at a pinch 1610. And that's really quite late on for the plays to be surviving. Now, I asked Brian to try and summarize all of this in a bit of a timeline. And you'll see that from the founding of Glasney into 1265, we've actually got 300 years plus of activity. This stuff flourished and blossomed and bloomed. And then in the middle, you've got some very, very active suppression going on. You know, Queen Elizabeth I explicitly forbade it. The colleges were suppressed. The mystery plays were forbidden. And what happened was that in Elizabethan London, of course, the whole thing transformed into a Shakespearean culture in which you expressly were not allowed to do religious stuff, but you could sing the glory of the ruling doctor of the day, and you could do the Henry plays to prove how good Elizabeth's ancestry was. The bizarre thing is that here in Cornwall, we get these clues of quite late on stuff, like the 6 days in the drama accounts in 1571, or the idea that Pendarvis could have still been acting as an ordinary. And then, incredibly, we've got the last of our manuscripts, which is at Crescent Kerner now, Greens and Bees, the creation of the world, was copied in 16. We know that precisely because it's signed by William Jordan. Of course, we're not saying it was performed in 1611, but there were people who actively wanted to keep that stuff alive as late as 1611. So, to summarize, we're looking at a phenomenon as a didactic enforcement of religious orthodoxy, which blossomed into an extraordinary artistic expression and in a very distinctive Cornish phenomenon, became subversive and was then actively anti-orthodoxy in the way it resisted the imposition of a puritanical religious approach. So I hope that makes sense looking back at that period. And I'm now actually just want to have a little look forward. This, of course, is not in Cornwall at all. Anyone know where that's to? That's in Obergammeray. Oberammergau. Oberammergau. But it wasn't in 2020, my lovelies, because of COVID. They've rescheduled Oberammergau to 2022. Why am I showing you it? Just a couple of facts about Oberammergau. Oberammergau, 2,200 actors. No, and 1 or 2 in the cast. Audience, 520,000. So this happens every 10 years. It happens every year with a naught on the end, except for it's going to be 2022. It has had a couple of hiccups in its history, but it's been going since 16 whatever. And by the way, this one's all about enforcing Protestant orthodoxy, not Catholic at all. But here's the key point I just want to make. The estimated economic impact of the Oberammergau every 10 years is 132 euros? No, 132 million. 132 million euros. Oberammergau has got the best children's playground, the best primary school, the best cinema, the best sauna complex, the best public park, the best archive facilities, Chloe, the best of everything. Don't you feel sorry for Unterammergau? That's the next town down the valley. It got nothing. Oberammergau, the economic impact of this cultural phenomenon is just life-changing for everybody there. So why would we not plunder the treasures that we've been given and make sure that we do our own thing? This is a photo from 2004. Now, there have been all kinds of revivals, and I showed you some photos earlier, like at St. Just Plen and Gwari, and there have been 1 or 2 by Low End of Perrin, at Perrin Round, various things like that. The reason I'm showing you this is because here, this was Knee-High Theatre, as you can see in the van, and we doff our cap to 40 years of extraordinary cultural frolics from Knee-High. This was just before Wild Works kind of split off from that company. And Sue Hill, who designed this set, deliberately was copying the Plen and Gwari footprints. So look, each character has their own pavilion around the outside, and there's a central thing. By the way, this is before the days of drone. See that little shadow in the middle? That's Sue hanging from a crane, taking the photo. And at night, of course, the space filled up, and people instinctively knew how to respond in that space. And here's our own show, Golden Tree. So we could also be seen as having our roots in Knee-High. Back in the day, I was part of that company in the 80s. And we created a mobile pop-up Plen and Gwari to surround the audience. This is up on the cliffs at St Agnes. And once again, we felt that it didn't take very long for audiences to understand how to use this space. This was a debate I had with Dominic Nutton back in the day when they first did the Ordinary at St Just, and he was very worried that a 21st century audience wouldn't know what to do. My buddy Jack Morrison was the first stage manager at the Globe, and he was saying when the groundlings first came into that yard, everybody sat down as if you were going to get out the picnic, and I don't know, like you might do in a nice country home somewhere. But so what they took to doing was they took to hosing down the yard so that people wouldn't sit down because it was wet, because they needed people on the hoof. Because when that audience is standing up, they have an energy, they have a response, they have a way of behaving and moving and milling, and they're able to get to where they can get a better view or get out of the way. So having the audience on their hind legs is a really important part. Therefore, I obviously need to just give a plug to the fact that St Just are once again taking on the enormous challenge of organising not just one, not just two, but three separate plays in the Plen and Gwari. And one of the issues there, of course, as I said right at the very beginning, is that the banks of the Plen are actually a bit too low. One of the great features of back in the day, and I'm sure will be true this year, is the extraordinary visual treats that the St Just crew, led by Graham Jobbins, etc., will come up with. So make sure you book your tickets to get down and have a look at that. I've been having some conversations with Jason Squibb and St Just about getting a bit of the original text in and not just doing the whole thing in translated from English, and we're playing with ideas about how that might be possible. So there's only one thing left we're going to have to do, my lovelies, and that's build one. The one that just is in a town and is a bit knackered about. The one at St Piran Round is an ancient scheduled monument, and you can't go digging holes in it, and you can't cuff it about. So we're going to have to build one. And I'm going to leave you with that thought, because although I've done a couple of strange things in my life, the only real thing on my bucket list before I go, everyone, I'm happy to say here in public, we need to build ourselves a Plen and Gwari. So thank you very much for having me. All you've got to do now is go out and buy my book, which you can do at this URL. Go to the Golden Tree website and look for shop. It's an absolute snip at 20 quid. It's full of lovely pictures. You don't have to even read it, just enjoy the pictures. So thank you very much for that. Do I stop screen sharing now, Chloe? Oh, she's gone. Stop share.